I can't even get it right. Now, none of the parables that Jesus shares in his ministry, none of them are easy to understand. But especially this one, I think. I think this parable, what it really does, is it pushes us to first distinguish between what we first see, that first impression, and then what reality is. To illustrate, when I was in grade school, middle school, I played baseball in the summer like a lot of kids do. And I was an average player. I played mostly outfield, a little second base. But even though I was a smaller kid, I could throw the ball pretty hard. And my coach noticed this one day, and he said, "Dan, you should think about pitching." I'm like, "Oh, cool." So in practice, he lines me up with a catcher, and I start pitching it, and I'm pitching it pretty fast. In fact, faster than the other pitchers who are on our team. And he said, "You know what, we'll maybe give you a shot next game." I'm like, "Okay." So sure enough, about halfway through the game, he calls timeout and pulls me up to the mound. He says, "Okay, here's your shot. Show him what you got, kid." So I'm warming up, and I'm noticeably faster than the pitcher who was pitching right before me. And he kind of caught that moment where the other team took notice, and they went, "Wow." Like you hear them talking to each other, and you even heard the coach say, "All right, step it up, boys. This guy's a little faster." Right? So I'm feeling all full of myself and getting ready to pitch. Well, 6 batters later, I had thrown about a total of maybe 28 pitches, and 24 of them were not strikes. And after I walked the bases full and walked in 2 more batters, the coach came out and said, "Well, that was fun, wasn't it? Let's go back to left field." There was something about when there was a batter there in the batter's box, I couldn't throw it across the plate anymore. I don't know what that was. But sometimes it's a reminder that sometimes what we see at first, a great first impression, is not what reality is. A couple years later, I'm a freshman in high school, and I went to a weekend youth gathering with my high school youth group from church. It was just a weekend gathering in the Twin Cities. I was looking forward to going. And the kids at the church, they came from a lot of different schools, and the other kids going were from different schools. And I knew them, but I didn't know them all that well because we had a couple churches together in our youth group. But I still was looking forward to going, and we got to the hotel, and we had a little time yet before the first event for the evening. And the guys I was staying with in the hotel room, some of their friends from their same school who go to another church were down the hall in another room, and they said, "We're going to go see them for a bit." I'm like, "All right, cool." So I follow them down the hall and going to go hang out with them for a while in their room because, back then you had MTV, which was really cool back in the 1980s, by the way. And so we're going to go watch a little MTV. And we're finally making our way into the room, and the kids in that room didn't know me because they were from a different school. You have to remember, when I was a freshman in high school, when I was 14 years old, I looked like I was about 10. I mean, I was really young, I was really short, and I looked really youthful. And the person at the door, this girl, as I started to come in, she said, "Oh, we don't want little kids in here," and slammed the door and walked away. Now, why the guys I walked down to that room with never came back to say, "No, he's with us," I don't know, but it's another story for another day. But it's a reminder that sometimes what we see, our first impression, even if it's one that we don't like, is not always reality. When I was a senior in high school, I had been running track for all my years of high school, and I was an average runner. I mean, I was not a threat to win anything, but I went to a really, really small high school, smallest division that you could have, kind of like Lafarge High School here. I mean, just about as small as you could get. And so all the teams that we ran against in our track meets were all these other small little schools. I had a cousin who went to high school in Pierre, South Dakota, a larger city, and their high school was really big, okay, the largest division in the state. And He once gave me a Pier High School warm-up kind of pullover that was really nice. And so I would wear that sometimes. And why my coach let me wear that to track meets, I'm not really sure when we were warming up, but I like to wear it. It was a really nice shirt. And so we're warming up before the track meet, running around the track, and we'd see other runners from other schools. And I'd hear people say, "Wow, Pier is here? Wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to be those little schools." It'd be kind of like Lafarge or Seneca or Cashton going to a track meet and Madison East shows up with a team. I mean, that would kind of be what it was like. And obviously, once I started to run and it was in the race, they saw, "Oh, you're a Tulare runner." Well, then there was no longer a threat to them. But it's a reminder that sometimes what we see at first, maybe some incorrect clothing or identification or how we present ourselves, is not always reality. And sometimes we overreact to those first impressions that we have and that we see. And I think with this parable especially, we want to overreact because we forget that it's a parable. It's not a direct description of what life is or what life is going to be. It's a parable meant to figuratively represent a greater truth that Jesus is trying to present. And sometimes we get caught up in that first impression of something that gives us trouble or that we don't like, and it may not be the main point or the main truth of the parable because sometimes that's elusive and it's hard to see, especially this one. But what I think is important in this parable is we hear how this king reacts to the people that don't come at his first invitation or to that person who shows up with the wrong robe. It's important to not get caught up in how that king reacts. The truth of this parable is not this. The truth of this parable is not, you know what, if you respond to God's invitation wrong, you're going to be immediately killed or immediately thrown out into the outer darkness. That is not what is happening in this parable. No, I think with all the possible interpretations that one could have, and sometimes we have different interpretations on the same scripture based upon where we are in life, our life circumstance, our life situation. I think what is the constant in this parable and what Jesus is asking for ourselves to think about is this. What do you do with the invitations in your life that you receive? And by invitations, I'm not talking so much here about, an invitation to a graduation party or a birthday party or an invitation to a meeting or invitation to some type of gathering. But really, how do you respond to those big invitations of your life? Opportunities that present themselves, callings in your life that make you think about something larger than yourself. Something that moves your heart and your spirit to take action for something that you think is important or to stand up for or to fight for. Because you and I, in this baptismal promise that Christ comes to us with, we have all been invited. We've all been called. We've all been gathered and enlightened by and made holy by the love of God through Jesus Christ. That's how we're invited. We're not called into some type of elimination tournament that we're trying to make our way through and make the right choices at the right time so we get to our goal of heaven at the end. That's not how this works. But we're called into a way of life that looks beyond the immediate and beyond our first impressions. See, the calling of Christ that is given to us is not concerned about our clothes, about how we look, not concerned about our qualifications, our skills, or even our achievements. I mean, if we were judged only by God by what we were wearing or by what we have done in our life or what every decision we've made when we're under pressure or by how we perform in an athletic competition or a competition of any sort, well, then we're all thrown out. But God doesn't do that. The point of this parable is how do we respond to the invitation that we have been given into this banquet of life, of living with one another. You see, we have an invitation to a way of life that looks to help others first. We have a calling that asks us to consider those who are weaker than ourselves, and how are we going to walk with them? We have been gathered not to see how perfect we are, or how good we look, or how good we feel about our building. But we've been called or gathered in order that we might help our neighbor, whether next door or across the ocean, to walk alongside them when they're broken and everything has been lost. We have been enlightened by the grace and love of Christ to show mercy and compassion to those who have stumbled, not to stand back and to judge them or ridicule them or to threaten them. We have been called into this banquet of life. Regardless of your background, regardless of the team that you played for, regardless of your civic or political philosophy, you have been given an invitation to come into this banquet of life. And what God is calling us into is that we go to this arm in arm with each other and extending that invite to all whom we meet. And I think Jesus ends this parable with these difficult words in the way he does, to banished into the outer darkness, weeping, gnashing of teeth. I think he ends it in such a serious tone because this is a serious invitation. It's life-changing. The invitation is not about your own salvation. That has been taken care of. What this invitation is about caring for and walking with and lifting up your neighbors through this journey, this banquet of life. You are invited to shine your light, to let the whole world see, not for your glory, but out of the compassion and love that never fails that comes from Christ. That's what we're invited into. And quite honestly, if that's not why you're following Christ and not why you're here, then you need to reevaluate what you've been thinking about. Because we are called into this for each other, not to put each other's down, not to push each other's out who we don't like, but to invite them in to this journey and this banquet that we have been so moved by that we can't stay away from. We've all been pulled from a team because we didn't perform well enough in the moment. We have all been unfairly rejected by someone or by something. We've all at one time tried to cover up something we didn't like or misrepresent who we are in order to make a splash in a gathering. We've all done that at one point or another. But the invitation that God gives is still upon your heart. God does not care about your failure, does not care about your rejections or your misrepresentations in life. God cares about you and the path that lies ahead for you and this wonderful journey of life. Thanks be to God. Amen.